Hi, I'm Tom Field, Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Welcome to today's session entitled Overcoming Unstructured Data Security and Privacy Choke Points. Your presenter today is Deborah Kish. She's Executive Vice President, Marketing and Research with Fasoo. Now, before I introduce Deborah, let me give you some background on today's session. Why do so many data loss prevention projects either stall or descope? Why, with significant industry expenditures in the space, do we continue to experience record-breaking instances of data breaches and exfiltration? What are the latest methodologies and technologies the security and privacy executives should consider to protect their sensitive data and comply with ever-increasing and pervasive privacy regulations such as GDPR and CCPA? Well, in this session today, Deborah is going to share insights gleaned from hundreds of sessions with security and privacy leaders to offer an insider's playbook to implementing an unstructured data security and privacy program. Whether migrating from existing DLP point solutions or wondering where your unstructured data lives today, Deborah will provide a lifecycle perspective as to the best methodologies and how to avoid the pitfalls that have plagued enterprise projects. You'll learn how a file-centric approach overcomes data leakage shortfalls of traditional approaches and best meets new privacy requirements, how aligning data classification with your data protection methods will put your projects on the fast track, and finally, how automation and integration of discovery, classification, access control, and file-based encryption is your best first-line defense. I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a bit about my organization, Information Security Media Group. We currently publish more than 24 international media sites. These include Bank Info Security and CU Info Security, Gov Info Security, and Healthcare Info Security. We also publish Info Risk Today, Data Breach Today, and Careers Info Security. Each of these sites is dedicated to providing education and news regarding information security, but specifically tailored to their individual sectors. In all, with over 750,000 members registered to our sites, we've created a true information source that tackles the key issues of interest to our unique audience. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Deborah during the course of this session, please submit them anytime via the chat window that you see on your screen. If any of you should experience any technical issues while viewing today's webinar, please dial the number on your screen. If you do dial extension 115, we have technical support staff standing by to help. Also, I do need to emphasize, the content being presented in today's webinar is copyrighted material. As such, it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you or your organization would like to use any of the information presented in today's session, or if you're looking for customized training materials, please contact us. It's my pleasure to introduce our sponsor today, Fasoo. Fasoo provides unstructured data security and enterprise document platforms that enable its customers to protect, control, trace, and analyze critical business information while enhancing productivity. Fasoo has successfully retained a leadership position in the unstructured data security market by deploying enterprise-wide solutions for more than 1,500 organizations globally, securing more than 2.7 million users. Fasoo is seeing continuous improvement in its global position based on unique technology, ongoing R&D, and a strategic approach to products capabilities. Fasoo's vision is to empower customers with platform technologies to achieve successful digital transformation. To exceed customers' expectations throughout this digital journey, Fasoo is dedicated to deliver exceptional value through software and services all around the world. Fasoo has a relentless focus on innovation and creativity and will continue to provide solutions to the challenges faced by organizations of all sizes and industries. For more information, please visit en.fasoo.com. And now it's my pleasure to turn this over to Deborah Kish. Again, she's EVP of Marketing and Research at Fasoo. She's responsible for leading the organization's research, marketing, and product strategies in the unstructured data security and privacy space. She brings more than 20 years of experience in research with her prior employer, Gartner, where she identified growth patterns, market sizes, and changes in competitive landscapes owing to emerging trends and end-user needs. For the past 5 years at Gartner, she worked in the technology and service provider security team, responsible for tracking data security technologies and advising thousands of end-user and vendor clients. She also monitored privacy regulations and management tools such as consent management and anonymization. With that, let me turn you over now to Deborah Kish. Deborah, it's all yours.
Thanks, Tom. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. My name is Deborah Kish, and I am here to present the first of a three-part series of webinars. In this first webinar, I'll discuss with you how to overcome the pitfalls and choke points of unstructured data security projects. This will ultimately be the backdrop for the next two, so I hope that you will join them as well. So first, I wanted to kind of highlight how much buzz there has been around unstructured data. I've actually tweeted a couple of articles that I'd come across, and these articles actually indicate the significance of growth that we're seeing in unstructured data security, and what things will actually look like in 3 to 5 years. So we've also been hearing lately at trade shows like RSA and AIM that companies are now actually talking about and are concerned about unstructured data. So we hear anything from how much investment has been made to control it, concerns over regulatory compliance, and where unstructured data is within their organization, and the challenges with how to control access to and ownership of it. So lots of companies are also realizing that unstructured data is growing, which also ultimately increases their risk footprint, and they really don't know what to do. So as I mentioned before, that, yeah, let's face it, unstructured data security is challenged. It is everywhere. It's in file shares in the cloud, on endpoints. It travels, it gets sent through email to both internal and external parties. And like I mentioned, it's growing, and it's growing largely because it's either created on its own organically, or it's pulled from structured databases and saved on endpoints or in a file share in the cloud. And it's both an asset and a liability. I'll first say it's a liability because if it has PII and it's been exposed or stolen, it may be subject to regulatory fines. So every company is a target, and the phrase, it's not if you will be hacked, it's actually when, is worth taking note of, because every company has unstructured data. And I realize that databases are primary targets, but sensitive data resides in files and folders everywhere and makes up a really large chunk of the data pool. In fact, a little nugget for you is that today, 80% of data is in fact unstructured. And not knowing where it is or and not protecting it means that it's a liability. And as an asset, obviously, because it may contain important business information of real value that has to be protected. So on this screen here, on this slide here, all the little purple dots on the left is all of that growing unstructured data that maybe about 10, 11 years ago or so, many of you have probably initiated your data security project by implementing enterprise data loss prevention, or maybe enterprise digital rights management tools, EDRM. And more recently, maybe some of you have implemented other point solutions like data-centric audit and protection tools. Lots of you are using CASBs. Some of you might be using UEBA. And All these point solutions actually have facets designed to increase visibility and compliance with both internal policies and regulatory requirements like GDPR or CCPA or maybe HIPAA. But you see how those purple dots are getting filtered through all of those point solutions, like one dot at a time? That's because each of these point solutions has its own logs, management console, and configurations to tweak. It's getting squeezed through that funnel slowly with the goal in mind to find it, classify it, secure it, make it visible, and hopefully be in compliance. And with all the motivations from regulations and the crafty hackers, there's a real difficulty in navigating through the maze of implementations, creating what I consider choke points, which would be the very center of that funnel on the screen. That these choke points either lead you to starting new projects based on new product implementations, or they restart projects that have either stalled or descoped. And these stalled data security projects and initiatives have real-world ramifications to data security and regulatory privacy, because they lead to data breaches with a sort of trickle-down effect. So fact, data breaches are at an all-time high. 2018 was deemed the year of the data breach because, according to the Bloom blog, in 2018, 2.6 billion records were exposed or stolen. Data breaches cause reputational damage, which could be difficult for most companies to bounce back from. Regulations. So one of the big things today is privacy regulations. Regulators are actually cracking down and taking more aggressive measures to hold companies accountable by imposing heavy fines on violations that, maybe could have been avoided. And the financial implications. Financial implications is pretty big. It's huge. And in fact, I actually just blogged about this a couple of days ago about two healthcare entities that between the two of them have to pay out nearly $2 million in fines because of what I thought sounded like improper access controls or access controls not being in place, or lack of using encryption as the go-to protection standard. And when you think about Facebook, if you look at Facebook, between the 540 million user records exposed and the Cambridge Analytica debacle and the 600 million passwords exposed, they're looking at between $3 to $5 billion in privacy violations from the FTC. And I actually had a conversation yesterday with someone who indicated that perhaps it's even bigger than that, and considerably bigger. So the fines are very serious. So as a CISO and as a business, you care about dollars and cents. And I'm sure that you can do much better things with 4% of your revenue because of a GDPR violation. And this ultimately leads to customer confidence being at an all-time low because the trust model is diminishing. So, let's not have customers think that data breaches happen. Instead, let's be more proactive and put in place simple but strong security controls. And I'll get to that in the coming slides. But first, I would walk you through what I think are the three root causes of the choke points and give you a few ways or steps you can take to overcome them. Let's take root cause number one. Traditional unstructured data solutions started with the same approach and methodologies that legacy ecosystem vendors used for network protection. And I'm talking about the network perimeter approach. Build the wall, keep the bad guys out. You know this one, defense in depth. Build a protective wall to keep the perimeter safe from intrusion. This means firewalls, IDIPS, malware detection, hardened configuration, software updates, and security policies, a whole bunch of things. Network access must be secure so that unauthorized users can't be let in. And then there's the DMZ, and what do you put in it? So we need that, and it makes sense. But the thing about unstructured data is, and this is really important, that it's a different beast altogether. It's wild, and it lives beyond perimeters. And think about this. The perimeter almost doesn't exist anymore. The perimeter is actually fading. So that leads me to root cause number 2. Implementation of location point-based solutions, or location-based point solutions. Because a new privacy regulation, something like GDPR, for example, came into effect, or a regulation changed. So now we're chasing the data. Because the data is moving, we have to chase it as it bounces from location to location, from folder to folder, from endpoint to endpoint, from cloud app to cloud app, in order to protect it. So this is the patchwork in the center of the funnel that I was talking about, which not only complicated data security and privacy initiatives, but led to projects that either stalled or descoped. And finally, root cause number 3, varying technology approaches. So rules-based approaches, they're fine. We all need rules. But this approach can be less effective because rules really just act on what users can or cannot do. So they really ultimately either allow or block. Now, applying encryption based on the location of the data, like in a folder or on a server, is fine. But remember one of the challenges that I mentioned? Unstructured data is everywhere, and it's on the move constantly. It's being created, manipulated, and shared. Then we get to file log dependency, which, by the way, is more folder-centric and requires an extensive setting up of security auditing and audit file access and logon event steps. And assuming that all the parameters have been set appropriately, like folder size or checking boxes, it'll tell you who deleted what or who tried to access what. But what it doesn't do is follow the folder. So given these 3 root causes, I want to impose upon you an approach that I believe will help you overcome the root causes and choke points. And I'll talk about the choke points more specifically in the coming slides. But first I want you to think about files, or file-centric. So you're no longer dependent on the location of the file. Secondly, I remember that I recommend, actually I don't remember, I recommend that you encrypt and control access to the files to protect the data itself, not just the folder that the data is in. Then add a persistent file ID to the data. The persistent identifier that's a persistent identifier that actually stays with the data and never leaves it, so that the data is traceable and meets regulatory compliance requirements. So what I wanted to say here was, why I want you to think file-centric. So, the idea around thinking about files is that, files actually live in folders, but the thing is that they can get taken out of those folders and manipulated, copied, and saved, and maybe not even in the original application. So for example, Word files can always change to be PDF files and then shared or relocated in another folder or application. So my point is here to just stop chasing the data. It avoids having to implement multiple and complex point solutions across multiple sites too. The file-centric approach also avoids conflicting alerts and that constantly need to be reconciled. And it means that you don't have to protect every location, network, or device where data travels. So think about it this way. Data protection is now location agnostic. So now that I have you thinking file-centric, or at least I hope I have you thinking file-centric, that actually leads to the next piece of a more simplified approach, which is to encrypt and control access. So by doing this, you avoid all of the fine-tuning and tweaking of rules to reduce false positives, because remember, rules do not protect the data. They just enforce what users can or can't do. Applying access controls gives you the power to allow the right people within your company to see what they need to see and keep them from seeing things that they don't. This is also far easier than having to manage folder access like through, for example, NTFS, which takes time, resources, and to some extent skills. And speaking about folder access management, encrypting a folder can also restrict workflows and potentially halt internal projects because, let's say, for example, you have a shared project and allow the people that are on the project to access the folder. That makes sense, right? Then maybe you hire somebody new, somebody else within the company joins the project, or maybe you'd have an external contractor join the project. Things like that may and oftentimes get overlooked. So that generally means that access is then not managed properly, and the new members can't access the folder and can't complete the mission, hence stalling a project. So encrypt files. My main message here is to encrypt files. Then you don't have to manage folder access and go through an exhaustive setup process that is not entirely infallible. So moving on to my third recommendation, attaching a persistent ID or a unique identifier to the file. So now, because you've implemented the patchwork that I mentioned before, as the data travels across that patchwork, you lose visibility and the ability to trace the data. And to trace the data, you have to pull logs from each and every data system, an application that has interacted with any electronically transmitted or stored data. So by applying a persistent ID to the file, it travels with the file, as opposed to most of the legacy solutions that rely on file logs, which really only provide a subset of the audit trail. So this is really important for regulations. If you're unfortunate enough to have a privacy regulation audit, you'll be able to respond more quickly to a request if you can show in a consolidated view where the data in question is and who has access to it, or who either has access to it or who has accessed it. So streamlining. So I just gave you a high-level view of a file-centric approach and the choke points that it solves. And now I want to walk you through some more detailed steps that will streamline your unstructured data security and privacy initiatives and put you really on the fast track towards compliance with privacy regulations and internal policies. The cool thing is that by doing this, it creates a foundation for you. So when you're ready for second and third wave implementations where, for example, you might want to add UEBA or artificial intelligence or maybe even blockchain, the platform or the foundation is there and it's in place. So first things first. First things first, finding it. Let's talk about finding unstructured data. You need to find it. You need to know how much unstructured data you have. And unfortunately, most of you probably don't know how much unstructured data you have. So in that case, how could you possibly protect it? So a recommendation here is to start with a data discovery exercise. Scan servers, file shares, storage applications, and endpoints. And I recommend starting with a time frame that you're comfortable with, whether that is 3 months, 6 months, or a year back. You choose. The idea here is to start small and not try to boil the ocean. So now that you've found your data, you need to classify it. And the key takeaway here is not to overcomplicate this process. So I'm suggesting that you derive a simple scheme. So 3 things: public, private, restricted, or sensitive. Restricted or sensitive, whichever you like. But keep it at 3. So public means anything that you can find on the internet, everybody has access to it, pretty easy. Private means internal data. So internal data meaning that it's selected based on It's information actually that has a business need to it, and it has a purpose. So, for example, things like marketing materials, product plans, intellectual property, financial information, things of that nature, and selected access to it based on the need. And then there's restricted or sensitive. So this would be things like PII, for example, things that are subject to regulatory compliance, either privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA, COPA, or regulations that are derived for protection. So things like PCI DSS and so on. And don't classify just for the sake of classifying. Lots of classification initiatives fail or stall because there are just simply too many layers. For example, if I were to take the middle classification, private, let's not add too many layers, like calling it private internal, private external, because that really ultimately means that you'd have to go through every file, figure out who gets access to what, make decisions around what kind of protection to attach to it, and whether that's, to encrypt it, anonymize it, redact it, and so on. It can be a daunting task, not to mention how things can easily get misclassified. So keep it simple. And by keeping it simple, that'll allow you to experience the efficiency of a file-encrypted approach. And that's what I had mentioned before about encrypting and applying access. I say that because you've already applied encryption to anything that's private or restricted or anything sensitive. And that's really all you need to do. So here you are now with a bunch of unstructured data that you didn't know you had, and it's now protected with encryption and access control is in place. From this day forward, every document that's protected and classified upon creation, every document is protected and classified upon creation immediately. You don't have to think about it. Then you can start thinking about older existing data. In other words, don't try to tackle too much initially. Remember I mentioned the 3 months, 6 months, a year back? Taking on too much in the beginning can no doubt, or I should say even will lead to a stalled project. It'd be like boiling the ocean. It would take forever if it ever did get, to completion, which I doubt. It's very unlikely, and you'd never get to a place where you have a baseline or foundation because you'd be too busy tackling things like false positives or, rescanning your servers and then tweaking parameters and rules. All the while, new data is being created on a regular basis and not protected. So we don't want that. So now that you've encrypted and applied access control and so on, you can track it. You now have ongoing visibility and control as your sensitive data moves. You'll know all of the who, what, where, and when of the data. You'll know where the location of unstructured data is and when and by whom the data has been accessed or manipulated by. The persistent ID stays with the file, whether it is sent in an email or accessed from a file share or folder, so it'll be more easily tracked because the protection follows it. Even if someone changes the file type, for example, I mentioned before, if someone takes a Word file out of a shared folder and makes a change and then saves it, but they don't save it back as a Word file, they save it as a PDF file, or they put it in Excel, or they put it in PowerPoint, or whatever the other extension might be. With an embedded ID on the file itself, it's protected. It follows it regardless of whether or not that file type has been changed. So you don't have to think about that. So here's another cool thing. Expiring access to inactive and unneeded data automatically. So lots of companies struggle with managing the life cycle of data. So depending on the industry you're in, you may have time requirements in terms of how long you need to keep certain data types. So let's take, for example, I like to use the education industry because it's required to maintain student grades and records for lengthy periods of time. I don't exactly know what that time frame is, but I've heard 10 years and I've heard 15 years. I'm just not sure. But anyway, let's say that if you have reached that requirement and you find yourself in a position of hoarding, you're in a hoarding situation where you've got a bunch of data. Unfortunately, it happens. Or, you know what? Better yet, even if you don't have a mandated time requirement and you find yourself on a mountain of data that either, hasn't been accessed in years, has no real value, it's not needed, or heaven forfend, it could show up in a regulatory audit, unprotected, and be the source of a regulatory fine. And I'm sure you don't want that. So if you expire access to it is the best way to deal with that. And how you can do that is by setting an expire date so that it automatically can't be accessed at all. And you can do this remotely, even at third parties. So this way, in doing so, your liability footprint has now been reduced, and you can remotely expire access to the data and ensure security across third parties. And remember, it's encrypted, so expiring access means that the vault's sealed. So automated expire will help you effectively manage and protect the data throughout its life cycle. So everything I just described is designed to streamline your unstructured data security and privacy initiatives to a fast track. Find unstructured data across multiple devices and servers and classify it. Protect the data with encryption and restrict user access and apply a persistent ID to every file. Trace the data wherever it goes for quick and easy regulatory reporting. Set an expire date so the data is inaccessible automatically. So I've gone through the choke points and the root causes and given you my recommendation on a more simplified approach to help you overcome choke points and eliminate the root causes. Doing so, like I said, will put you on a fast track for stronger unstructured data security and compliance and stop having stalled or descoped initiatives. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Fasoo. We were founded in 2000, so we've been around for quite a while. And in that almost 2 decades, we've helped plenty of organizations with their data security and privacy challenges. We are deployed at over 1,500 customers globally with millions of users in very large enterprise. So just wanted to put that out there. And with that, we'll move on to questions. I'll open the floor to Tom for questions, and we'll take it from there.
Oh, very good, Deborah. Thank you so much. Terrific presentation, great insight. As you said, we've got the opportunity to take questions now. And I want to remind attendees, if you have not submitted your questions via the chat window on your screen, do so now. Those questions that we can't answer in the course of this session, we will respond to via email. So Deborah, I've got some questions that have come in. The first one I have for you: if we encrypt everything, won't that impact our workflow?
Thanks, Tom. That's actually a really great question, and we actually get this a lot. So our approach makes it easier since you don't have to rely on rules to determine what's sensitive and what isn't. Everyone who needs access to data actually gets it. If something slips through, you're automatically protected.
Okay, Deborah, next question for you. How do we prevent internal or external users from sharing data with the wrong parties?
Okay, great. Another good question, and one actually with merit. So how you would do that is grant specific users and groups access to your data. If they share it with someone who's unauthorized, either internal or external, that party can't access the data. So the beauty of it is that you're always in control and you can revoke access really quickly, I mean literally with the click of a button.
Deborah, third question. Do I need a classification process to protect my data and comply with regulations?
Yes. In a word, yes. And you can actually simplify data classification to about 3 categories, like I mentioned before. So public meaning everyone gets access, nothing sensitive. Private, meaning that this is internal stuff that serves a business need, like product plans, financial information, and so on, where only select folks get access to it. And restricted or sensitive is, stuff that's subject to a regulatory requirement. This approach I described is actually, the approach that I described was to encrypt and apply access control after you've developed those classification schemes. So then you encrypt and apply access controls to everything that is tagged as private and restricted or sensitive, whatever one of the two you like, and then just tag the rest as public, so you've inspected it, and that way it'll allow other tools like data loss prevention to actually see it.
Deborah, last question I have here for you today. How can you tell if a document is covered by GDPR?
The GDPR question. I'm actually glad that you asked. Thanks for that. We have actually developed complex pattern templates that actually analyze the content and the metadata of a file in order to apply a classification. So the templates are actually customized for each customer to reflect their specificities, their specific attributes of their own data, because obviously everybody collects different kinds of data and everybody likes to classify specific kinds of data differently. So that's the how we can tell whether it's covered by GDPR.
Well, Deborah, I appreciate you taking time to answer these questions. Thank you so much for that and for the insight you've shared.
I thank you, everybody. I know everybody is busy, so I really appreciate your taking the time to join, and I thank you very much, Tom, for hosting this and ISMG. And my email address is on one of the slides there. In case we didn't get around to your question, then please go ahead, feel free to send me an email message. So thanks again, everybody.
Oh, let me echo your words. We are grateful for the attendees. You took time out of your day to attend this session. We do trust that today's discussion provided some valuable insight to you to enable you and your organization to be even better prepared to tackle the challenges we discussed here today. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming events. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you very much.